Hi, everyone. I am really pleased that I get the opportunity to introduce our guest speaker. Carol Robles-Roman, how'd I do? As I'm sure all of you know, she is currently the co-president and CEO of the ERA Coalition and the Fund for Women's Equality, and her resume boasts no shortage of impressive milestones, including a 12-year stint as Deputy Mayor for Legal Affairs and counsel to the former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg. For Carol, the drive to fight for social justice is in her DNA. In a recent interview in The Guardian, she explained, "I was raised in a social justice home. My mom came to the U.S. in the 50s when Puerto Ricans were being treated terribly. She was a huge advocate for migrants and immigrants." Ultimately, Carol pursued a law degree, graduating with a JD from New York University in the hopes of continuing her parents' legacy. She has spent the bulk of her career in different arenas of the global fight for civil rights. During her tenure with Michael Bloomberg, she worked to combat human trafficking and violence against women, as well as to support immigrants and anti-discrimination laws. Toward the end of her time working for the mayor, Carol had an ominous sense. "I couldn't describe it, but I felt this tsunami coming against women," she said. The feeling led her to dive directly into work focused on women's rights and eventually to accept a role as president and CEO of Legal Momentum, which is the oldest legal advocacy for women in the country. She co-chairs the New York City Council for Young Women's Initiative Advisory Council. She is on the NOW Advisory Board, on the boards of the Women's Forum of New York and Veteran Feminists of America. She is a member of the NFL Domestic Violence Working Group. Her many recognitions include the American Bar Association Commission on Domestic and Sexual Violence 2017 Sharon Corbett Award, the National Women's Political Caucus 2015 Women of Courage Award, the Smart CEO 2014 Brava Award, and designations as one of the 100 most influential Hispanics by the Hispanic Business Magazine. And I only touched on a very small part of her resume. We are proud to have Carol Robles-Roman as our keynote speaker. Please join me in a hearty North Carolina welcome.
Thank you so much. As my husband says when I'm introduced, he goes, "Lady, you can't hold a job." Well, I got this one, and this is the one. This is the keeper. Good afternoon. I am so excited to be here with fellow gender justice warriors to talk about our favorite constitutional amendment to be. I want to first thank our presidents, Roberta Madden and Marina Grohl, and the gender justice advocates of ERA North Carolina Alliance for your leadership, and many thanks to the many elected officials that have come out here to support this convening today. I'm really proud to be here with all of you to activate, to motivate, and to inspire. I don't know if you need inspiration, but maybe we can inspire each other. To inspire North Carolina to be the one state to 38 to reach, right? We're going to do it. We're going to reach into every county. We're going to mobilize advocates to contact their legislators, asking them to become bill co-sponsors when the bills are introduced. Everybody, big, small, blue, green, bipartisan. This is as bipartisan as it gets. All must join this bold, brave, and big vision in the fight for equality. And who would say no? It's a line that I use no matter what kind of room I go into when I sense there's going to be a little bit of hesitancy on the ERA message. I said, okay, raise your hands. How many people here are against equality? And so no, I said, so okay, so you're all supporting me, so just sign up. And so, because this is as simple can be. North Carolina should be the state that ushers in a new era of women's rights for the whole nation. And make no mistake, North Carolina has to keep going no matter who is 38. We have to have the back of our sister state, Virginia, who, if you know, it may happen, if they become 38, you know, rear guard action. We need to show a fierce will for equality, and I think, well, I know that we're going to do it because we're making history. We're making history today. You're going to be making history when the bill is introduced. So I'm proud of being part of this momentum and to be spreading this ERA message around the country. A little bit of history about the ERA Coalition. We were founded in 2014, so we're a pretty young organization to raise awareness and advocate for an equal rights amendment. And our coalition partners are similar in structure as yours. We're made up of civic organizations, large organizations, small grassroots organizations, but we have one basic theme that runs through all of them. In order to be a member of the ERA Coalition, you have to agree to beat the ERA drum anywhere and everywhere that you are. We don't ask for dues. We ask for commitment. We educate and we change hearts and minds about the unequal economic, legal, and social status of women in the United States. We advocate in Congress. We advocate everywhere. We provide training tools. We provide resources. And our mission, you know, what's the big deal already, right? Just a little teeny tiny amendment, 24 words that guarantees women constitutional equality to expressly prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex. That sounds so simple, isn't it? Yeah. We know that it's not, right? And so we're working double time to change that. We have been doing massive media. I hope you've been getting our blitzes. We have been on CNN, on MSNBC. We have been in the Washington Post, you name it. And we have been interviewed in the last year because we're making our message as simple as that, right? I'm a pretty smart lawyer. I'm a very smart lawyer. But you would think I'm a fourth grader when I am interviewed by the media because they want to engage in a dissertation analysis. And I don't want to have that conversation. I want to have this one. They go, what do you think about the 14th Amendment? I said, you know what? Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote a great article on that in 1973. Google it. I'm here to talk about this. So what's the number one media issue? What's the number one question that we get around the country anyway on the ERA? I'd love to share a couple of these. The number one question is, why do we need an ERA? I heard somebody say it here. They beat me to the pump. Why do we need an ERA? Fair question. They could Google that too, but I answer it. Because despite our gains as women, sex discrimination still continues to limit our economic opportunity and justice in the United States. Poverty, pregnancy and discrimination, violence against women, and other forms of discrimination are pervasive, and women are oftentimes without effective legal recourse. Now, for the first time, I have to admit, in a long time, I have not been asked this question: why do we need an equal rights amendment? Or whether sex discrimination really exists in this country. I think you know why. Because the last months has showed us that the scourge of sex discrimination does still exist, and it was our very government that was at the helm. The government is complicit in what has been going on as of late. So they've been making the argument for me. So without dwelling on the negative, and to keep today positive and forward-looking, in spite of the upheaval in D.C. this week, I say this: with the likely passage of Brett Kavanaugh as the next Supreme Court Justice. Boo. Boo. Well, you know what? Let's see what happens, right? I think the vote is at 4. Lighting candles, my little rosaries. There are millions of women who now know, again, that our systems in our country do not represent or oftentimes defend them. That is why the next battle must be the one to amend the Constitution like the sign says. Put women in the Constitution. The Supreme Court and all justices in this country need a document that is fair, inclusive, and recognizes the rights of women, that these rights must be on an equal footing with the rights of men.
Yeah, that's right.
We all had concerns about Kavanaugh's judicial temperament displayed in his hearing before the Senate, about his interpretation of the laws when it involved civil rights. We also know that we are a broken society with rampant sexual abuse of women in this country. But fundamentally, this process has unleashed the determination of women and men of the United States that must be directed towards fixing the very document that determines how we live. The ERA Coalition is here to lead the fight for equality. It is time for all men and women to join us. And I feel this urgency. I know you feel this urgency. I feel it very personally as a woman of color. I know that women of color are disproportionately harmed. We are usually the least likely to report because often we have the most to lose. And I've seen this firsthand, and it's not pretty. Before this post, they mentioned that I was president and CEO of the Women's Legal Defense Fund, the country's oldest civil rights organization, where we sued bad guys for a living who discriminated against women. And I litigated, I advocated, and I defended on behalf of women's rights. And here's the spoiler alert. Our justice system, most courts, are not fair to women. I learned the hard way that this cannot be our sole path to justice. And it won't be, because we will make history. We're making it now. North Carolina and the state legislative advocacy that's taking place will finally make constitutional equality a reality, right? I'm saying it in the positive. It shall happen.
Yes.
So what's the second most asked question that I get, which is, why now? Like, what's the big deal? Like, why are people all of a sudden, talking about the ERA? Isn't this thing like old and buried? What's the new urgency? Well, certainly the Me Too movement and Time's Up has created a new momentum. The renewed media scrutiny and attention to the discriminatory and criminal acts of very powerful male executives and celebrities like Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby have put constitutional equality front and center where it belongs, and frankly, where it should have been all along.
Yeah.
However, initially, the media I felt was giving too much credit for these recent victories to our recent political victories, to the current political climate. And they didn't realize, and I remind them, there is a generation of women's organizations, of equality organizations that have been beating this drum. The national organization, these organizations throughout the country for 20 and 30 years. Do you know that they have no idea that we exist or that we have existed and that we have been talking about constitutional equality for 20 years? And that the Me Too movement and Time's Up is actually, on some level, riding on the coattails of the momentum that you established. So these are three movements coming together, and that's the story. The fact is that this country wants constitutional equality. An often cited poll, and I know everybody has cited it in all of their literature, and I want to make sure everybody knows that it was the ERA Coalition that commissioned it, found nearly universal support for amending our Constitution to include women. And listen carefully, because this is our biggest problem: lack of information. 80% of those polled mistakenly believe that men and women are already guaranteed equal rights in the United States Constitution. 94% of those polls say they would support an amendment to the United States Constitution, and that was a bipartisan figure. I will tell you that I have had journalists call me, important journalists with important credentials, because I'm a lawyer and I do my due diligence beforehand, and I can tell by the questions they have no idea what they're talking about. So I say, can we go off the record? And we go off the record. And I say, tell me a little bit about your background, about the ERA, how much research you've done. And they're like, I don't get why I'm interviewing you, because, like, isn't there already an Equal Rights Amendment? And are you doing like a new one? And I have to take them back. And I'm proud to do it, and I'm happy to do it. But for that poll, I wouldn't have even thought to ask the question. So when you're being interviewed or you're going anywhere, don't assume that people even understand that the ERA never passed. So what did we do? Oh my God, we've got journalists who don't know this is going on, everybody who we speak to. So we created what we call an equality roadshow. And we decided, where were we going to do our first roadshow? We were going to do it in Washington, D.C. So we went to the patron saint of women's rights and constitutional equality, Carolyn Maloney. And she wrote the Senate Judiciary Committee. Boo. And can we have a hearing? I'm sorry, did I do that? I didn't mean that. This is supposed to be a bipartisan, and that was bad. That was wrong of me. So raise your hand if you think that Carolyn Maloney got a response. No, she did not. She did not. So my idea was, right, I'm new on the job and I'm a little feisty, and I said, well, why don't we have our own hearing? And they're like, well, that's not really the way it's done in D.C. I said, oh, well, can I ask a question? When was the last time there was a hearing in Washington on the ERA? 33 years ago. Does that sound right to you? No. That doesn't sound right to us. I said, well, let's have a rogue hearing, a fake hearing. Let's have a hearing across the street. Let's have a hearing at Arby's. So she thought about it, and she said, you know, I can have a hearing. I can call my own hearing. So that's what we did, and we called it A New Era for the ERA. And the folks who testified were people who had never testified before, who had never spoken before, who had never written before on the ERA. We were going to give you fresh voices, a fresh vision. There is no way that anybody's going to say, oh, that again? Women's rights, constitutional? And we presented in a way that you couldn't turn away. So what ends up happening, and the Congresswoman was so wonderful. She says, you know, we're so proud of the ERA coalition. We don't want you to be, you know, disillusioned or upset if nobody comes. It's like you're having a party and you hope people show up. So everybody showed up. 15 Congress people showed up, testified, spoke, standing room only in the hearing room. So everybody's saying, oh my God, media all over the place. We were able to recruit Alyssa Milano to our cause, who has been an incredible. I don't know if you saw what she drafted yesterday on CNN. The ERA coalition. She's on our board, and we had crafted that with her. That was part of the testimony that she gave in D.C. So Alyssa Milano has 4 million or something Twitter followers and Instagram. So she brought that magic and that energy to Washington, D.C., and all of it was on the Equal Rights Amendment. And so Alyssa testified, and the other 4 people that testified were all women of color, because that's the other thing, and that's the other reason that a lot of people step back and say, oh, I'm not going to support this because it's not diverse, and it's not intersectional, and it's not intergenerational. Well, guess what? The Equal Rights Amendment is intergenerational, intersectional, men, women. Half the Congress people that showed up to testify were men. Were men. A video ultimately came out, right? This cute little video, and I think they mentioned it in one of the articles that they wrote recently. And Alyssa Milano featured in this video on the hearing. The video was seen 1.2 million times within 3 days. So do we have a message? Are people listening? Of course they are. Of course they are. And there's a little quote in one of the articles, because I didn't show it to my daughter, because I said, oh my gosh, she's going to jump out the window. Her mother's in a Now This video, because, you know, I'm old, and I'm not cool, and I'm not supposed to be on, you know, hip videos that are shown on Facebook. So my daughter and I look exactly alike. So one of her classmates sees it and says, this looks like Ariana Roman, but like 30 years later. So he says, Ariana, do you know this woman? She looks exactly like you. And she's like, that's my mother. So she calls me up, and she's like, Mom, is that you in the video with Alyssa Milano? So I knew that we had made it when college students at Georgetown University are talking about the Equal Rights Amendment. And I knew we had made it when Congressman Nadler, who we had come and we had paid a courtesy visit to, and he's wonderful. He's in New York, and he says, "Oh, I support. I can't come to the hearing." And I looked at him and I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Why?" He goes, "Oh, well, I have something very important to do." And I just said, "Congressman, what's more important than civil rights for women?" And he said, "I'll see you at 3:00. And he was there, and then he stood up and he announced, which he didn't tell us, he said, "In all likelihood, if things go well, I am going to be the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, and one of my first orders of business is going to be the first official hearing on the ERA in Congress in January." So the energy is there. We're bringing it all together. I like to say that the equality pendulum is now swinging in our direction. And we are going to use this momentum to continue to call for a new era for the ERA, calling for equality and calling for respect. We're going to continue our equality roadshows to coalesce around a cohesive strategy, a mission of ambitious action steps, and we are going to continue to motivate an army of diverse, passionate volunteers to work in a strategic way to break the power of the status quo once and for all. Thank you.